Look at her. No, don't just glance. Look closer. Because what you're seeing right now is not just a woman. It's a moment in time. A moment the world once couldn't escape. Megan Fox wasn't just famous. She was everywhere. Every screen you turned on. Every magazine you opened. Every conversation that mattered. She didn't just enter Hollywood. She dominated attention. And that's a different kind of power. Because attention is the currency nobody talks about. It's invisible, but it controls everything. And for a period of time, she had all of it. Men didn't just admire her. They obsessed. Women didn't just notice her. They compared. Hollywood didn't just cast her. They built narratives around her. She became something bigger than an actress. She became an idea, an image, a symbol. And symbols are dangerous. Because once you become one, you stop belonging to yourself. You belong to the world. And the world? It doesn't care about your truth. It cares about how you make it feel. So let me ask you something. When people look at you, do they see who you really are? Or do they see what they want you to be? Because for Megan Fox, that line disappeared completely. And when that happens, you lose something most people don't even realize they have. Control. Control over your image. Control over your narrative. Control over how long your power lasts. At her peak, she didn't look powerful. She looked perfect. And that's where the trap begins. Because perfection is the fastest way to become replaceable. Think about that. The more flawless you appear, the less room you have to evolve. And in Hollywood, if you don't evolve, you get replaced. Not slowly, not gently, but immediately. And here's the part no one tells you. The higher your image rises, the more fragile it becomes. Because it's not built on who you are. It's built on how people perceive you. And perception can change overnight. So now ask yourself honestly, if everything people believed about you suddenly shifted, would you still have power? Or would everything collapse with it? Because that's exactly what happened. Not gradually, not predictably, but in a way that made the entire industry stop and then quietly move on. And that's the most brutal part. Not the fall, not the criticism, but the silence after. Because when the noise disappears, you finally realize something terrifying. You were never in control to begin with. So what really happened? How does someone go from being the most desired woman in the world to someone people barely talk about? How does a face that once defined an era become a memory? And more importantly, how do you lose power when you still have everything the world said you needed? Beauty, fame, recognition. The answer isn't simple, because this isn't just a story about one person. It's a pattern, a system, a cycle that repeats itself over and over again. Build, elevate, control, replace. And if you don't understand it, you're just another part of it. So stay with me, because what you're about to see is not just the rise of Megan Fox. It's the moment everything started to change. Back then, before the silence, before the questions, before people started asking what happened, there was a different reality. A reality where everything worked, where everything aligned, where everything made sense. Megan Fox didn't feel like someone chasing success. She felt like someone's success was chasing. And that distinction matters. Because there are two types of people in Hollywood. Those who fight for attention, and those who attract it. She attracted it, effortlessly. Not because she was trying too hard, but because she represented something the industry needed at that moment. A look, a presence, a feeling. She wasn't just another actress. She was a visual impact, and Hollywood knows exactly what to do with that. It amplifies it. It multiplies it. It turns it into something global. Then came Transformers, and everything changed. Not gradually, instantly. One role, and the entire world knew her name. That's how fast it happens when a system decides you're valuable. Because once Hollywood decides to push you, there's no ceiling. You don't climb. You get launched. And she was launched into fame, into desire, into a level of visibility most people will never experience. She became one of the most searched women in the world. Think about that. Not just admired. Searched, studied, watched, repeatedly. That's not fame. That's obsession. And obsession is powerful, but it's also dangerous. Because the moment people obsess over you, they stop seeing you as human. They see you as an experience, something to consume. something to talk about, something to project their own ideas onto. And once that happens, you lose your identity in the process. But at the time, none of that mattered, because everything looked perfect. Every appearance increased her value. Every role reinforced her position. Every interview expanded her reach. She was becoming a brand, not just a person, a brand that represented beauty, desire, confidence, and power. But here's where things get complicated. Because when you become a brand, you don't control how people use you. They define you. They shape you. They expect consistency. And the moment you break that expectation, everything shifts. But during her rise, that moment hadn't come yet. Everything still worked. The industry still supported her. The audience still admired her. The system still pushed her forward. And from the outside, it looked like there was no limit. But inside that momentum, pressure was building. Not obvious, not visible, but real. Because maintaining an image is harder than creating one. And the more perfect the image, the harder it is to sustain. Think about it. If people see you as flawless, what happens when you show imperfection? If people see you as a symbol, what happens when you act like a human? If people build expectations around you, what happens when you step outside them? That's where the risk begins. And that's exactly where she was heading, without realizing it. Because when everything is working, you don't question the system. You trust it. You follow it. You believe it will keep working. But systems don't protect individuals. They protect outcomes. And the moment your presence stops serving the system moves on. That's the reality of Hollywood. It doesn't matter how fast you rise. What matters is how long you can stay aligned. And alignment is not about talent. It's about control. Control over your image. Control over your words. Control over how you fit into the machine. And the moment that control slips, everything changes. But at this stage, none of that had happened yet. She was still rising, still dominating, still becoming one of the most recognizable faces in the world, still living in that moment where everything feels untouchable. And that's exactly why it matters. Because the higher you rise in that moment, the harder the fall becomes. And the fall was already closer than anyone realized. And then it happened. Not a failure, not a scandal at first, just a moment, a few words, an interview, a comparison that didn't sit well with the people who control the machine. And suddenly, everything shifted, not in public at first, but behind the scenes. And that's where real decisions are made. Because Hollywood doesn't destroy you loudly. It removes you quietly. One project at a time, one opportunity at a time, one call that never comes back. And before you even realize what's happening, you're no longer at the center. You're on the edge. This is the part most people never see. Because from the outside, it still looks normal. You're still famous, still recognizable, still relevant on the surface. But inside the system, you've already been replaced. And here's the brutal truth. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about beauty. It wasn't even about performance. It was about alignment. Because the moment you step outside what the system expects, you stop being an asset. You become a risk. And risks get removed. Now ask yourself, would you rather be authentic or accepted? Because sometimes you don't get both. At her peak, she looked like she had everything under control. The fame was there. The recognition was global. The image was still strong. But control was already slipping. Because real power in Hollywood isn't what people think. It's not fame. It's not followers. It's not attention. It's who controls your narrative. And once that control moves away from you, everything else becomes temporary. Think about it. She still had the looks, still had the presence, still had the name, but something invisible had changed. The industry no longer needed her the same way. And when that happens, your value drops. Not because you're less capable, but because you're less useful. And usefulness is everything in that world. This is where most people misunderstand success. They think reaching the top means safety. It doesn't. It means exposure. The higher you go, the more visible you become. And the more visible you are, the easier it is to replace you. Because now everyone sees your position. Everyone wants it. And the system? It's always ready to swap one face for another. Now, think about this. If your position depends on how others see you, is it ever really yours? Then came the silence. Not dramatic, not explosive, but quiet. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because when things collapse quietly, people don't notice at first. They just move on. New faces appear. New names take over. New stories replace old ones. And suddenly, you're not the focus anymore. You're a memory. She didn't disappear completely. But she wasn't dominating anymore. She wasn't leading the conversation. She wasn't setting the tone. And in Hollywood, that's the difference between power and irrelevance. Because if you're not leading, you're following. And if you're following, you're replaceable. She tried to come back. New roles, new appearances, new efforts. But here's the problem. The system had already moved on. And once momentum is gone, it's almost impossible to recreate. Because momentum isn't built alone. It's built with support, with timing, with alignment. And once those elements disappear, you're working against the current. And working against the current takes more than talent. It takes control, something she no longer had. Here's the truth, the part nobody wants to admit. Beauty gave her access. Fame gave her visibility. But neither gave her control. And without control, everything is temporary. Because when your value is based on perception, your position is never stable. It depends on what people think, what the media says, what the industry wants. And those things change constantly. That's the real game. Not becoming famous, but staying relevant in a system that's designed to replace you. And if you don't understand that, you don't control your success. You're just experiencing it. If you're watching this, don't just watch. Understand. Because this isn't just her story. It's a pattern. First, if your value is based on how people see you, you will always be vulnerable. Second, the system doesn't protect individuals. It protects outcomes. Third, attention feels like power, but control is the real power. Fourth, the moment you lose alignment, you lose position. And final, the higher you rise based on perception, the harder you fall when it shifts. This is up because. So let me if everyth, Sud, what would you? Would you still have power? Or will you just be at